Hashem says to Moshe that as a result of the plague, that 24,000 Jews died in the plague due to Balpor. He wants the Jews to be counted again. As the Medrash always tells us, it's like when a wolf goes into a flock and kills some of the sheep, the shepherd always wants to know how many sheep are left to indicate and express his love and his concern for the flock. So we're being counted. So we start from Ruvain. Ruvain, Bechor Yisrael. Ruvain is the firstborn of Yisrael. Bnei Ruvain, Chanoch Mishpach Chanochi. Chanoch is one of the families, the family which is referred to as HaChanochi. Lefalu, another family of Ruvain, Mishpach HaPalui. Lechetzer, Mishpach HaChetzroni. Lecharmi, Mishpach HaKarmi. Okay, each of the families identified, and then it's referred to, although the name of the family was Chetzron, it's referred to as HaChetzroni. We have a Hey at the beginning of the word and a Yud at the closing of the word. So over here, Rashi, very famous Rashi, which we discussed in the past. The Jews, the world, the nation of the world, were disgracing the Jewish people. What were they saying? Continuously, they're tracing the pedigree to the paternal line, continuously. This tribe, that tribe. Who do you think? Who are you trying to fool? Don't you think that the Egyptians had control over your mothers, meaning they defiled your mothers? If they dominated their bodies, they could torture us and kill us. Don't you think they actually defiled their women? So do you really think you're the issue of your parents, of the Jews? You're all of Egyptian descent. So how do you counter that? Therefore Hashem associates his name with them. Hitil, Hey mitzad echod. The family is identified with Hey as the opening letter. The Yud mitzad zeh, the closing letter is Yud, which is Yud K, name of Hashem. Lomar, to indicate Meir ani alechem, that I personally attest to the pedigree and the purity of the Jewish people, Shem b'nei avoseim, that they are the children of their fathers, and none of the Jewish women were defiled. Because otherwise, you have the obvious question, as they said, it's Kal v'chomer. If they were able to control the bodies, the physicality of the husbands, you don't think they were able to dominate the women? And that's what David refers to in Tehillim. Shiftei Koh, we the tribes of Koh, Yud, Hey, Edus B'Yisrael. That they refer to as Shiftei Koh, that is the testimony, the testament that we are the Jews, that we are the issue of our families. That is the basis for the pedigree of the Jew. Hashem Hazeh Meir Alehem Shemisyachin L'Shtifteim. The name of Hashem attests to the fact, and therefore they could trace the pedigree to each one of their tribes. Lefichach B'Kulam Ksiv HaChanochi HaPalui. Therefore, every one of the families that we mentioned, they're referred to, or the name of the family is Chanoch or Palu, but they're referred to as HaChanochi and Palui. Ava b'Yimno, there's a family mentioned which is referred to as Yimno, Lohutzrich Loma Mishpach Sayimni. The Fisha Hashem Kavu about Yud Berosh Vehei Besof, because the name itself has the Hey at the beginning and the Yud at the end. Okay? So we asked the question in the past. We've been counted multiple times. And whenever we were counted, God did not have to attest to our purity. And this is the last counting before we go into Canaan, as a result of what just happened. Now God attests to what happened. Why now? What about until now? All the various countings, the world could say the same Kal v'chomer. If they dominated the husband's bodies, don't you think they had control over the women? So who are you fooling? So I was thinking just now that maybe that when we were in the desert, everything was irrelevant. Are we the issue of our parents or are we not? But now that we're going into Canaan to settle and take over the land and to divide the land, that each tribe has its share. And this is Reuven's share, and this is Shimon's share. And it's the land of Israel. It's the land of the Jews. And the Jew is determined by the paternal line in terms of to identify them. So now the world could say, who are you fooling? Don't you realize that you're all Egyptians? You're all of Egyptian descent. Therefore now, because we're entering into the land to divide the land and to identify that each portion of the land identifies with a particular tribe, now Hashem has to attest to the pedigree, that the pedigree is pure regardless of what the world says. The Kal V'chomer, which they're putting forth, they said, it's true. Logically, you're right, but factually, it's not that way, because I personally attest. So that's the reason why now Hashem is attesting to the purity, to the pedigree for that reason itself. You know, it's interesting, there's a Maral. The Maral says that the 70 root nations, the world was divided among the 70 root nations. And we had mentioned that the Egyptians, of all the 70 root nations, have the least level of spirituality. They're the most physical of all the nations of the world. And that's why Yechezkel HaNavi refers to them as chamorim, as donkeys. He refers to the Egyptians as besor chamorim besoram. The flesh of the Egyptian is like the flesh of a donkey. And the Maral explains that the word chamor, the rooted word is chomer, material. Of all the nations, they're the most materialistic nation, means they have the less degree of spirituality. And because of that, therefore, we find a greater degree of witchcraft and illegitimacy, every level of perversion, and they represented all the levels of impurity in the world because they had the least degree of spirituality. So he says, the Maral says that when Hashem divided the land among the nations of the world, the 70 nations, every nation received its part of the world because in terms of the representation of the world, we said that everything in the physical is a spiritual counterpart. Every location has an angel, and that angel has a certain representation of spirituality. Egypt received that location because Egypt had the least degree of spirituality, therefore that was its location. That's Egypt, the land of Egypt. The Africans, they have another level of spirituality. And because of their spiritual infrastructure, makeup, therefore they received Africa. And every one of the nations, the Edomites, everyone received its location because it reflects the degree of spirituality that it possesses. When we find the land was divided among the 12 tribes, it was al pi gorel, it was done through lottery, and also with the Urim V'Tumim, and it was also prophetic. Yoshua would take the lots out, and the gorel would actually, the voice coming out, which was like Hashem saying, this portion belongs to this tribe at this location, and this and this. So therefore, every part of Eretz Yisrael that was divided, and the way it was divided, the reason each tribe received its portion is because it fits its spiritual profile. So therefore, we could appreciate now that we're about to go into Eretz Yisrael, until now it's irrelevant. Are you the issue of an Egyptian? Are you the issue of a Jew? But at this point that we're about to go into Eretz Yisrael to divide the land, and the land will identify with every one of us, and each one of us has relevance to that particular location due to our spiritual makeup, that's if the pedigree is what is traced back to the founding fathers of each one of the tribes, which are the 12 sons of Yaakov. But in fact, the paternal line is, they're all Egyptians. So what are you wasting your time? So to establish the reality and the truthfulness of what the Jews are and what Eretz Yisrael is, how each one exactly fits its location and reflects its location, therefore Hashem now had to attest to their purity, and therefore each one of the families has Yud Kei associated with each one of the families. This I never said this before. I'm saying it now. So as good as your memory is, this is something something you wouldn't remember. Okay, that's number one. What I said in the past that in Egypt it was known that no Egyptian ever defiled a Jewish woman, which is unheard of. I mean, here we're slaves, we're chattels of the Egyptians. They can do anything with us, and yet not one woman is defiled except that one woman, Shlomo Spas-Difri. The whole story with the Egyptian who Moshe killed. I mean, it's unheard of. How's it possible? The answer is the Jews merited special divine protection that no Egyptian would even consider going near a Jewish woman. Why? It's miraculous. So the Medrash says that Sari Menu, when she was in Egypt and she was taken by Paro, and he wanted her to be his queen. And she was the most beautiful woman who ever was created, other than Chava. She was one of the four most beautiful women. And only due to miracles, she was not defiled. As it says in the Pasuk, that the Paro was smitten with great smites. And the Medrash says that Sari Menu said to the Malach, Hach, she said to the angel, smite, and the Malach had smitten Paro. And he couldn't go near her, did not touch her. That's when Paro realized that she was a married woman and she was a holy woman. At that moment, it wasn't so simple. You know, Sari Menu had a little bit of a challenge. Egypt was the height of civilization, the height of power in every sense of the word. Sari Menu, if she would have, at that moment, what was Avram? Avram was really, had no renown, had no wealth, had nothing. Now she has a choice. She can become the queen of Egypt, become the queen of the world, or not to be drawn into it, not even to consider it. She chose as she chose. She was a holy woman, Sari Menu. So because Sari Menu did not allow herself to be defiled by Paro, therefore in that merit, every one of her daughters, the women in Egypt, everyone merited divine protection. That no Egyptian would consider going near a Jewish woman for that reason. That was the basis for the miracle that no Jewish woman was defiled. So it comes out interesting. If you trace it, why it says B'schus Noshim Tzidkonius Niglav Sin Mitzrayim. In the merit of the righteous women, the Jews were redeemed from Egypt. So what was that? So we explained the Kior was made from the copper mirrors. And the copper mirrors are referred to as Maros Hatzovos, the Maros of the legions. So Rashi cites Chazal, why we refer to as the mirrors of the legions, because the men being enslaved, being killed, being tortured, they already despaired. They believed they'd never leave in Egypt. If that's the case, they had no interest in procreation. The women would go out with those mirrors to the field, and they would bring food and hot water and soothe their husbands, and they would take the mirror and they would look into the mirror together with the husbands, and they would entice the husbands and arouse them, and they would have relations in the field, and they would conceive in the fields. The Jewish people, when we left, we had to have a critical mass of 600,000 men above the age of 20, because that was the critical mass to come to Kabbalah Torah. Only because of this enticement with the mirrors did the women have children. So due to the women, it was a Kabbalah Torah. Because only due to them did we have those numbers. Since Maros Hatzovos, it's the mirrors of the legions. That's Chazal. That's Noshim Tzidkonis Niglav Sin Mitzrayim. Now the question is, if God forbid, if the Jewish women would have been defiled by the Egyptian men, you could have millions of men above the age of 20. It's all irrelevant. Because the pedigree is not a Jewish pedigree. It's not traced to the Shiftei Koh. So it's only because Sari Menu chose to keep Paro away from her, and she had smitten him. That's the reason why we merited this divine protection that no Jewish woman was defiled. As a result of that, the children that were born are Jewish children. They're the issue of their parents. So the pedigree is a Jewish pedigree. So the 600,000 men above the age of 20, these were Sivi Hashem. They were the legions of Hashem. And therefore they qualified for Kabbalah Torah. So now the question is, Now that we're going into, so that's the reality. The reality is that we, not only because what the world says, do you think, who are you fooling? Who are you deluding yourselves? It's much more basic. We only have relevance to Kabbalah Torah only if we're at with the issue of Jewish pedigree. If the paternal line is from the Shvatim, therefore Hashem says, I attest, and that's what we call Shiftei Kor, Edus B'Yisrael. David Abel says, the Yud K is the testimony that the Jews are authentic, and the pedigree is what is pure. That's what it's all about. So now the question was, we asked, why now? So the first answer we gave, which I never said before, was now we're going to settle the land, and now we have to identify as a Jewish people in the land. And the world has to recognize this Eretz HaKadosha, because we have relevance to every location we are. It meets and fits the spiritual profile of every one of the tribes as the 70 root nations. The other thing was like this. It was known in Egypt, except in Egypt, that no Egyptian man went near a Jewish woman. The Jews had a certain aura. And because of that aura, whatever it was, Egyptian men never went near a Jewish woman. And the Jews themselves were careful. They themselves in this area were perfect. What happens when they violated this area? And they themselves entered into the area of impropriety, licentiousness, because now they're engaging with non-Jewish women. So now the world says, you know something? They're no different than we are. So if there we see them now no different than we are, until now, we like hoodwink. We thought they were that special people. Now we see they're no different than we are. Therefore now, at this point, because there's a breach in that aura, Hashem has to come into the picture and attest to the purity that regardless of that, whatever happened, those who violated that area, they died in the plague. All the rest that remain, I attest to the purity, to the pedigree, that they are the children of their paternal line, and therefore they are truly the Jewish people. And that's what David says, Shiftei Kor Edus B'Yisrael. The Yud K is the testimony that the Jews are authentic Jews. They are the children of their fathers.